There's a photograph in rural Virginia that almost nobody outside one family has ever really looked at it twice, and the few who have don't like to describe it. It shows a bride, white lace, veil pushed back, face turned just slightly toward the camera. Beside her, a groom in a dark suit. And if you try to look at his face, not glance at it, actually look, it won't hold still. Not blurred like bad film, more like a word you've stared at so long, it stops looking like a word. The date on the back reads 1893. Her name was Clara Pendleton. She was 14 years old. She's not the only one this happened to. She's not even close. Quick housekeeping. Then we're in it. If cases like this are your thing, documented. Not campfire subscribing means you catch the next one before it disappears off your feed. That's the only ask I'll make. Here's what I spent 3 years finding. For over 150 years, one Virginia family married off its firstborn daughter at exactly 14 years old. Every generation. Always the same date on the calendar. Always to a groom that not one living witness, not a neighbor, not a sibling, not the girl's own mother, could ever accurately describe. This isn't folklore I picked up secondhand. It's in courthouse filings, census sheets, and family Bibles that, as far as I can tell, nobody in this family has opened voluntarily in decades. This is the story of the Pendleton daughters, and the men who weren't quite men who married them. The Pendletons landed in Virginia in 1768, tobacco and textile money, the kind that ages into old family respectability within a generation. The patriarch, Nathaniel Pendleton, built his house on a low hill outside what would become Charlottesville and had 4 children, 3 sons, and a daughter named Margaret. In 1782, when Margaret turned 14, the family announced her engagement. The wedding was held on the autumn equinox, September 22nd, 200 guests, roast duck, imported wine, dancing past midnight. Everyone there remembered the day for the rest of their lives. The dress, the flowers, how still Margaret stood during her vows, so still a cousin thought she might faint. Nobody remembered the groom. The family Bible lists him as Thomas. No surname, no birthplace, no parents recorded. When researchers tracked down descendants of the original wedding guests almost 2 centuries later, not one could give a physical description. Margaret's younger sister Elizabeth left behind a letter. It survives in the Virginia Historical Society archive, where she tries 3 separate times to describe her new brother-in-law and can't finish the thought. He has a kind face, I think, she writes. Then, underneath, in the same hand, or perhaps I only assume it, because Margaret does not weep, the letter just stops there. The ink is smudged, like she set the pen down mid-sentence and never picked it back up. That letter is the detail that convinced me this was worth 3 years of my life. Not the missing groom, the shape of not being able to see him. People weren't lying about Thomas. They were trying to describe him, and something in the trying kept failing, and it left a mark on the page when it did. Margaret had a daughter within the year. She lived to 73, and Thomas stayed by her side the entire time, on paper at least. He's head of household in every census. Occupation, landowner. And that's it. No tax records. No property deeds. No signature anywhere except that one marriage certificate. When Margaret died in 1855, he didn't come to the funeral. Nobody could say when they'd last actually seen him. A granddaughter, writing a memoir decades later, remembered playing at her grandmother's house as a child and sensing a man in the study, a presence behind a door she could never bring herself to knock on. And here's the part that matters. Before Margaret, there was no pattern. Nathaniel's own wife married at 20, his mother at 19. Whatever this was, it started with one wedding, on one specific day in 1782, and then it didn't stop. Nathaniel himself only outlived that first wedding by 6 years, and a single surviving ledger entry from his hand, dated the week after the ceremony, records a payment, a large one, by the standards of the estate's other expenses, that year logged with no itemized purpose. Just a figure, and beside it, in his own writing, settled in full. Neighboring families at the time treated the marriage as simply unusual, a fast courtship, a young bride, nothing yet worth remarking on twice. It would take 3 more generations before anyone in the county started keeping count. I'm going to move faster through the next few generations. Because the shape repeats almost exactly. Firstborn daughter, 14 years old, married September 22nd, groom nobody can pin down. What I want to slow down for is Catherine Pendleton, born in 1809, because she's the first Pendleton daughter who left behind something close to a warning. Catherine kept a diary from age 9. Most of it is ordinary needlework, the weather, complaints about her brothers. The entries stop on September 20th, 1823, 2 days before her 14th birthday. 2 days before her wedding. They resume 4 months later, January 1824, with one line in handwriting so unsteady it barely reads as hers. I understand now why mother never speaks of it. 300 pages follow. All blank. She never wrote in it again. Catherine lived another 56 years. Her daughter Eleanor later told a family friend that her mother had a habit of standing in doorways, not walking through them. Standing in them. Watching. The way you'd watch a door you were sure something was about to come through. At night she'd check every lock in the house before bed, including her own bedroom door. Especially her own bedroom door. Eleanor said she never explained why that detail stuck with her, only that it did. Catherine's husband recorded as William shows up in exactly one photograph, a daguerreotype from 1850. He's standing behind Catherine and their 3 children, one hand on her shoulder. Where his face should be, there's a soft, white blur. When conservators examined the actual plate over a century later, looking for damage or a chemical flaw, they didn't find one. The blur isn't something that happened to the photograph, it's what the camera captured. Or failed to. Catherine's daughter Eleanor married in 1837, 14 years old, to a man recorded as Michael. Eleanor's younger sister Grace was a bridesmaid, and Grace was the kind of person who kept records of everything: household expenses, the weather, her children's height on every birthday, logged with the flat precision of someone who found comfort in numbers. Her entry for the wedding day is one line: Eleanor wed today. I wish I could feel happy for her. 3 weeks later, Grace went to visit her sister. The house was locked. She knocked for 20 minutes and could hear, unmistakably, someone moving inside, footsteps, a chair scraping, breathing close to the other side of the door. Nobody answered. Here's Grace's ledger, word for word, because the restraint in it is worse than panic would have been. Eleanor would not open the door. I heard her voice, close to the wood. She said, "Please go. I am not allowed." I asked who would not allow it. She did not answer. I heard a man's voice say something I could not make out. Then nothing. Grace never saw her sister alone again. Not once, in 43 years. I want to sit on that for a second, because it's easy to let the supernatural stuff carry a story like this and skip past what's actually the worst part in it. Strip away the blurred faces and the vanishing men for a moment. What's left is a 14-year-old girl locked in a house, telling her own sister through a closed door that she isn't allowed to open it. Whatever these husbands were, the first and most reliable thing they did wasn't a haunting. It was a locked door and a town that had already decided not to ask what was behind it. By the late 1800s, the Pendletons were a fixture of local legend, but the legend the town told itself was about the money, not the marriages. Crops on Pendleton land never failed. Businesses never went under. Through financial panics that gutted their neighbors, and through a civil war that burned entire counties down to the chimneys, the Pendleton estate came out untouched. Not one building lost, not one field trampled. A Confederate officer's diary from 1863 describes riding past the property at dusk, intending to stop for water, and finding his men simply wouldn't go near it. They said the place felt wrong, he wrote, as though we were being watched by something not quite human. I felt it too. We rode on. The town noticed, the daughters noticed, they vanished into their marriages and almost never came back out in public, noticed the strange, forgettable men who arrived once a generation like clockwork. But every time that noticing got close to becoming a real question, something happened to the question. Not fear, more like static. People would start to ask, and within a day or two they'd simply lose the thread of what they'd wanted to know. In 1903, a Richmond journalist named Adelaide Morris came to town to write a feature on old Virginia families and got curious about the rumors. She spent 3 days interviewing residents, and her notes found decades later in a trunk in her sister's attic show she was building a real case. 7 generations of 14-year-old brides laid out in the census data. A former Pendleton servant's granddaughter who claimed her family had seen things in that house no Christian should witness. On her 4th day, Adelaide walked up to the estate to request an interview. She came back to the inn a week later. Her notes were still hidden under her mattress like she'd been afraid someone would find them, but when her editor asked how the story was coming, Adelaide looked at him with total, untroubled confusion. What story? I took a week's holiday in the country. Nothing worth writing. She never got the investigation back. Years later, when her sister tried to show her the trunk, Adelaide wouldn't look inside. She said just thinking about it gave her a headache. And it wasn't only reporters. I found 3 separate coroner's inquiries between 1811 and 1889, each opened over some minor irregularity connected to the family of Groom's missing name on a death record. A discrepancy in a burial ledger, and each closed within a week for lack of anything worth pursuing. In every case, the official's own handwritten notes trail off mid-sentence, drifting, like the hand kept moving after the mind had already wandered somewhere else. One county doctor, called to the estate in 1888 to attend a difficult birth, kept a private casebook throughout his career, thorough, almost obsessive, the kind of records a man keeps because he doesn't trust his own memory. His entry for that visit is 4 lines long, and unlike anything else in 40 years of notes, no patient description, no details of the delivery, just the date, the address, and a single sentence written twice, as though he'd forgotten he'd already written it once. Nothing remarkable to report. He never went back. Neighbors brought food when a new daughter was born. They came to the weddings every September 22nd. They looked directly at the blurred men standing at the altar without ever quite registering the blur, and then they went home to dinner. Whatever protected this family wasn't hiding in the dark. It was standing in daylight, shaking hands, counting on the fact that daylight is exactly where people stop looking closely. In 1946, a 13-year-old named Virginia Pendleton found the attic. She was different from the girls before her. She read. She asked questions other Pendleton daughters had learned, generation over generation, to leave alone. In the attic she found rows of wedding portraits going back to 1782, pale girls in white beside men whose faces slid out of focus the moment you tried to hold them steady. She was still sitting on the floor, surrounded by photographs, when her mother Rebecca found her. Rebecca didn't scold her. She sat down beside her daughter and said, quietly, "It's not as terrible as you think it will be. You get used to it." Virginia asked what she meant. Her mother wouldn't say more. But that night, Virginia heard her parents arguing, heard her mother pleading, and underneath it her father's voice, low and wrong, not quite resolving into words, more like wind through something hollow. Her mother kept saying, "She's just a child. Please, just a little more time." By morning, Virginia's father was gone, not dead, just absent, in a way that made the house feel bigger and colder at once. Her mother wouldn't discuss it. September 22nd was 11 months away, and Virginia understood, with a clarity that scared her more than any ghost story could have, exactly what was coming. So, she ran. February 1947. Grandmother's jewelry, $70 from the household drawer, a bus ticket to Baltimore, a note that read, "I'm sorry, I can't. Please don't look for me." The family didn't report her missing, didn't call the police. They waited. Virginia made it 7 months. She worked in a department store, rented a room under a false name, told people her parents were dead. She wrote letters to her cousin Sarah that she never mailed. hid them under her bed, and in them she kept describing the same recurring dream, a room with no doors, something breathing behind her. "I keep seeing him in crowds," she wrote. "The man I was supposed to marry. Except it's never the same face. It's every face. I think he's looking for me." On the morning of September 22nd, 1947, her landlady broke down a door locked from the inside, window sealed, no forced entry, and found Virginia unconscious on the floor, in a white dress no one had ever seen her own, a ring already on her finger. She woke 3 days later with no memory of the dress, the ring, or how she'd gotten there. What she did have was the flat, exhausted certainty of someone who'd just lost a fight she hadn't known she was in. She had to go home. Virginia went back that October. She never tried to run again. But in 1948, she had a daughter, Alice, and for the first time in the family's recorded history, a Pendleton woman decided to break the silence instead of just surviving inside it. When Alice turned 12, Virginia told her everything. The pattern. The marriages. The husbands nobody could describe, her own escape, and the wedding dress she woke up wearing with no memory of putting it on. And then, she said something no Pendleton woman appears to have ever said out loud before. "You don't have to do this. We can fight it together." She hired a lawyer to file emancipation papers ahead of Alice's 14th birthday. He drew them up. He never filed them. When Virginia called to follow up, he had no memory of ever meeting her. His secretary found the shredded documents in a filing cabinet 3 weeks later. She tried a priest next, begging him to help break what she called a contract our ancestors signed. He agreed to visit the estate. Neighbors watched him walk through the front door on a Saturday afternoon in August 1962. Nobody saw him leave. When the church reported him missing, police searched the property with the family's full cooperation and found nothing, no sign of him. No sign of violence, just an unremarkable house, and a family who insisted, apparently sincerely, that he'd left after an hour and they had no idea where he'd gone. The lead investigator later told a reporter he'd felt a strong, unexplainable urge to drop the case. "Every time I tried to write the report," he said, "my mind slid off the subject. Like, it didn't want to be written down." Alice's 14th birthday was September 15, 1962. The wedding was already scheduled for the 22nd. Like it always was. Virginia spent that week in controlled panic, tried to drive Alice out of state, and the car broke down 3 times in 3 miles, hid her in the cellar, and Alice sleepwalked back to her own bed, boarded up windows against something she couldn't name. On the morning of the wedding, Alice was already dressed in white, a gown a local seamstress had delivered overnight, and later swore, with total conviction, she had no memory of making. Alice stood in the parlor, eyes open but distant, a man beside her. Virginia gave one interview about it years later to a folklorist cataloging Appalachian family traditions. And it's the closest thing to an actual description anyone in this whole investigation gave me. He looked like a husband. Like any husband. Like the idea of a husband. But when I tried to really see his face, not glance, see it, my eyes hurt. Like staring at the sun. 37 guests came to the chapel. Every one of them remembered Alice clearly. Not one could describe the groom, recorded on the certificate as Robert, no surname, no history, nothing. Alice had a daughter in 1963. Charlotte. Virginia held her granddaughter and wept, because she already understood the shape of the 14 years ahead of her. Virginia died in 1991. In her final delirious weeks, she kept repeating one phrase. "We made a deal. Someone made a deal. And we keep paying for it." Charlotte married in 1977, September 22nd, 14 years old, and by then, on paper, the world had changed. Child marriage was illegal in Virginia. Mandatory schooling existed. Social services existed. The wedding happened anyway. The paperwork went through anyway, processed by a county clerk who, when I found her decades later and showed her the birth certificate proving Charlotte's real age, stared at it and said, "That can't be right. I would never have approved that." She had approved it. So had every clerk, judge and witness for almost 200 years before her. The Pendleton weddings seemed to exist in a place where scrutiny slid off, the way water slides off glass. I found Charlotte in 2021. 63 years old, living alone in Kentucky, 400 miles from the estate. Her own daughter Elizabeth, born 1978, cut off contact with her 20 years earlier. Charlotte wouldn't tell me why, only that Elizabeth got out, and that this was the only part that mattered. I asked if she remembered her wedding day. She said yes. I asked her to describe her husband. She was quiet a long moment. "I've been married to him 44 years, she said. "I see him every day. I couldn't tell you what color his eyes are. I couldn't tell you his favorite meal. I couldn't tell you one story from his childhood, because he's never told me one, or maybe he has, and I simply can't hold on to it." She showed me a photo album. Birthdays, holidays, ordinary afternoons. In every picture that should have included her husband, there's a shape instead, a presence. Your eye slides past the way it slides past a word you've read too many times to actually see anymore. I asked her the question I'd spent 3 years chasing. "What are they?" She smiled, and it was the saddest thing I've seen doing this. "I don't know," she said. "My mother thought they were demons. My grandmother thought it was punishment for something one of our ancestors did. Me, I think they're exactly what they look like. Husbands, just from somewhere that doesn't run on the same rules we do. Whatever deal got made in 1782 is still being honored. One daughter a generation, married at 14, until there are no daughters left to give." I asked if she worried about Elizabeth's daughter, her granddaughter. The smile disappeared. "Elizabeth doesn't have a daughter," Charlotte said. "She has 3 sons. The line is broken. The estate sold in 1995. 4 owners since. None have lasted longer than 2 years. They all report the same things, independently without having compared notes, doors that lock themselves. Footsteps in rooms that are empty when you check. The specific feeling of being watched from just outside your field of vision. The current owner is trying to get it condemned. That should be the end of the story. A closed bloodline. A broken curse. A house nobody wants. It isn't. And this is the part that's kept me up more nights than the rest of it combined. While I was tracing the Pendletons, I found the same architecture showing up elsewhere, thinner, harder to confirm, but unmistakably the same bones. A family in South Carolina. Another in Tennessee. One in Maryland I'm still not sure I should name. Different surnames. Different land. Same pattern. A firstborn daughter, married at 14, to a groom no living witness can describe. And a family that prospers in eerie, exact proportion to how completely that daughter disappears into her own marriage. I don't know what these husbands are. I don't know who first made the arrangement, or what exactly was promised in exchange for it. I don't know if a family running out of daughters is the only way the debt gets paid off, or just the only way I've been able to document. What I keep coming back to is that smudged letter from 1782, Elizabeth Pendleton, unable to finish a sentence about her new brother-in-law's face. 240 years later, I think I understand that unfinished sentence better than I want to. The worst things don't usually announce themselves. They arrive dressed as tradition, seated at the head of the table. Remembered fondly by everyone and clearly by no one, and by the time anybody thinks to ask a hard question about them, the asking itself has already started to slip away. If any of this sounds familiar to you, a wedding portrait in somebody's attic, a relative's husband nobody in the family can quite describe, an old story about a family tradition nobody wants to explain past a certain point, put it in the comments below. I'm not promising I can do anything with it. I'd just like to know I'm not the only one still listening at the door. One last thing, and then I'll let you go. Somewhere in my own notes from the Charlotte interview, there's a paragraph in my own handwriting describing a second conversation we had, one I have no memory of having. I've read it more times than I want to admit, trying to decide whether I'm remembering something that actually happened, or just remembering the act of reading about it so many times that it started to feel like a memory. I don't have an answer for that yet. Given everything else in this file, I'm not sure I want one.